Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see in a photograph. It's realizing when it was taken. Jake Martinez had been driving for 12 straight hours when the neon sign of the Pineview Motor Lodge finally cut through the darkness ahead. The flickering vacancy sign was missing half its letters, but he didn't care. His eyelids felt like sandpaper, and his hands had started to shake from the endless stream of gas station coffee. He just needed a bed for the night before the final push back to campus. The desk clerk was a gaunt man in his 60s who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Jake slid his credit card across the scarred wooden counter. "Room 12, the man mumbled, handing over a physical key attached to a plastic diamond that read Pineview in faded blue letters. The carpet was a brownish color that had probably once been beige, and the bedspread looked like it hadn't been changed since the Clinton administration. Jake kept glancing at the camera's silhouette on the nightstand. His dreams had been strange and fragmented flashes of running through mud, the sound of a camera shutter clicking in the darkness, and the persistent feeling that someone was watching him. If nothing else, he was curious about what the previous guest had thought was worth photographing. The disposable camera was still there on the nightstand, somehow looking more ominous in the gray morning light. When he returned to pick up the photos, the same teenager handed him a yellow envelope with a strange expression on her face. "It'll be ready in an hour," she said, giving him a receipt with skeptical eyes. The moonlight, streaming through the thin curtains, made it look almost alive, like some kind of sleeping creature. But the bed was there, and that's all that mattered. His hands were trembling slightly as he pulled out the stack of photographs, though he couldn't say why. The furniture was identical, down to the broken alarm clock and water-stained lamp. But in this photo, there was someone lying in the bed, a figure wrapped in the same dingy bedspread, completely still. His face was peaceful, unaware, captured in the infrared flash that disposable cameras used in low light. The timestamp in the corner read the previous night's date, 3:17 a.m. Checkouts at 11. He looked around the parking lot frantically, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Someone had been in that room with him. Someone had stood at the foot of his bed in the darkness and taken his picture while he slept. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, with an undertone of something vaguely organic that Jake tried not to think about. The plastic was cracked along one side, and dirt was caked into every crevice. Who leaves a camera behind in a place like this? But as he flipped through them, the images became increasingly disturbing. One he'd somehow missed showed the Pineview Motor Lodge at night, but something was wrong with the image. In the window of room 12, his room's pale face was visible, pressed against the glass. Dark shapes that might have been people moving between trees. Something pale and elongated crouched by the water's edge. A tent that had been shredded to ribbons. And why was it so filthy? He set it back on the nightstand and tried to forget about it as he got ready for bed. He could feel that there was still film inside the counter window, showed 24 exposures with 3 shots remaining. As Jake dropped his duffel bag on the floor, something on the nightstand caught his eye. Sitting between a broken alarm clock and a water-stained lamp was an old disposable camera, the kind they used to sell at convenience stores before smartphones took over. It was covered in dried mud and looked like it had been through hell. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his hands. His first instinct was to toss it in the trash, but curiosity got the better of him. But as he lay in the darkness, listening to the highway traffic and the occasional creak of the old building settling, he woke up feeling more tired than when he'd gone to sleep. Jake grabbed it on his way out. The CVS pharmacy in the next town still developed film, though the teenager behind the counter looked at the disposable camera like Jake had handed her a fossil. Jake killed time at a nearby diner, drinking coffee that was somehow worse than gas station swilled, and trying to shake off the lingering unease from his dreams. "Weird pictures," she said, then quickly looked away. Jake didn't open the envelope until he was back in his car. The first few pictures were mundane enough blurry shots of a forest trail, some rocks by a stream, what looked like the entrance to a cave. Jake's mouth went dry. These weren't vacation photos. They looked like documentation of something terrible. The second to last photograph made his stomach clench when it was taken inside a motel room, the same motel room he'd slept in. With shaking hands, Jake flipped to the final photograph. It was him. The photo showed Jake sleeping in that same bed, taken from the foot of the room in complete darkness. Jake dropped the photos, his heart hammering against his ribs. But that was impossible. He'd locked the door. He'd put the chain on. There was no other way into the room, lest they'd never left. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, its coordinates, nothing else. As he stared at the message, another photo fell from the envelope onto his lap, watching, waiting. And in the photo's timestamp, Jake could see the impossible truth. The picture had been taken 30 seconds ago. He looked up at the motel in the distance, then back at the coordinates on his phone. Somewhere out there, someone was still documenting their work. And Jake realized, with growing horror, that his night at the Pennyview Motor Lodge wasn't over. It was just beginning. Some smiles aren't meant for the living, and Marco learned that the hard way on a Tuesday night he'll never forget. Marco had always been a night owl, but working double shifts at the electronics store was pushing even his limits. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he finally pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex. A tired-looking building from the 70s with long outdoor corridors that stretched like concrete fingers into the darkness. The desert palms wasn't much to look at, but the rent was cheap, and for a 23-year-old saving up for something better, it would have to do. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered as Marco climbed the stairs to the second floor, casting erratic shadows that danced across the peeling paint and cracked concrete. His footsteps echoed in the still night air. The only sound besides the distant hum of the freeway and the occasional cough of an air conditioning unit struggling against the Arizona heat. Not even a shift of weight from one foot to the other. As it got closer, Marco could make out more details. Her mouth was stretched impossibly wide, revealing far too many teeth, each one gleaming like polished marble. Marco could hear his own breathing, suddenly loud in the oppressive quiet of the corridor. The air felt thick, charged with an electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was the kind of smile you might see on a child's opening presents on Christmas morning, except there was something fundamentally wrong with it, something that made Marco's skin crawl. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to find somewhere else to wait until she was gone, but exhaustion and stubbornness won out. This was his home, his corridor. He had every right to be here. Up close, he could see that her eyes were wide open, unblinking, pupils dilated despite the bright lights overhead. Behind him, he could hear nothing, no footsteps, no rustle of fabric, no sound of breathing, just that oppressive, watchful silence. Her skin had a waxy, artificial quality, like a department store mannequin. He spun around to close the door, stealing one last glance down the corridor. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back into a tight bun. Marco could smell something now, the usual scent of industrial detergent he associated with the cleaning staff, but something else, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. We don't have anyone working past 6 p.m., haven't for years, insurance liability and all that. And he's never been able to look at a laundry basket the same way since. The woman's head tilted slightly, and for a terrifying moment, Marco thought she was going to look up at him. Marco stared at it for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he slammed the door shut, turned every lock, and didn't sleep until sunrise. But her gaze remained fixed on whatever treasure lay hidden in that innocent white basket. But still, that smile never wavered. If anything, it seemed to grow wider as Marco drew near, stretching the skin of her cheeks until it looked painful, unnatural. Her uniform was crisp and white, almost glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. What could possibly be in there that would warrant such intense, joyful attention? His imagination began to conjure possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. As Marco rounded the corner toward his unit, he stopped short. There, at the far end of the long corridor, maybe 50 feet away, stood a figure. The complex's cleaning staff usually finished their rounds by early evening. Maybe she was working overtime, catching up on missed units. Still, something about the scene felt wrong. Like a photograph that had been slightly overexposed, revealing details that shouldn't be there. It was a woman in what looked like a housekeeping uniform, the kind the maintenance staff wore during the day. She stood perfectly still, holding a white laundry basket against her hip. Her head tilted down as if examining its contents with intense fascination. Marco glanced at his watch. 2:07 a.m. What was housekeeping doing here this late? He began walking toward his apartment, his keys jingling softly in his pocket. The woman didn't move, but it was her face that made Marco's steps slow. She was smiling, not just smiling, but grinning with an expression of pure, unbridled joy. 20 feet away now. The woman still hadn't acknowledged his presence, gaze fixed downward into the laundry basket with that disturbing, rapturous expression. 15 feet. Marco tried to peer into the basket as he approached, but the angle was wrong, and the woman's body blocked most of his view. 10 feet. Close enough now to see the individual strands of gray in her hair, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the basket's handles. Marco's apartment was just past where she stood. He would have to walk directly by her to reach his door. 5 feet. Marco passed directly beside her, so close he could have reached out and touched her shoulder. The smile never faltered, never even flickered. He fumbled with his keys at the door, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to find the right one. The key finally turned, and Marco practically fell through his doorway. She was gone. The laundry basket sat alone on the concrete, abandoned and empty. The next morning, Marco asked the building manager about the late-night cleaning staff. The man looked confused. "Night shift," he said, scratching his head. Marco never saw the woman again, but sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, he still catches a faint whiff of that sickly sweet floral scent drifting through his door. Some sounds are meant to stay buried, but the Sleepy Inn Motel had a way of bringing the dead back to the surface. Grace had stayed in plenty of questionable motels during her years as a traveling nurse, but the Sleepy Inn made her skin crawl the moment she stepped out of her car. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting sickly pink shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot. Half the letters were burned out, leaving only SAP Inn glowing against the October night sky. "It's just for one night," her boyfriend Marcus said, shouldering their overnight bag. "The GPS says the next town is 40 miles, and I'm dead on my feet." Grace nodded, though something about the place felt wrong. The office smelled like cigarettes and mildew. The night clerky, gaunt man with yellowed fingernails, barely looked up from his newspaper as he slid them a tarnished room key. "Room 237, he muttered. "Ground floor, around back. Checkouts at 11. The queen bed dominated the small space, its floral comforter faded and worn thin. Marcus immediately collapsed onto it with a groan. Their room was exactly what Grace expected. Wood-paneled walls that had seen better decades, television older than she was, and carpet that squelched slightly underfoot. "At least the mattress is decent," he said, patting the space beside him. Grace forced a smile and joined him, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach only grew stronger. The room felt heavy somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. She tried to shake off the sensation as exhaustion from their 12-hour drive finally caught up with her. She lay perfectly still, listening. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed to 17 a.m. They'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the knocking started. Tap, tap, tap. "Do you hear that?" Grace's eyes snapped open in the darkness. The sound was soft but insistent, like someone gently rapping their knuckles against wood. It seemed to emanate from somewhere else, entirely somewhere indefinable in the darkness. Tap, tap, tap. "Kay, Marcus," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. Kay suggested, though she knew that wasn't right either. He stirred groggily. "Hear what?" He moved to the window next, pulling back the heavy curtain. The parking lot outside was empty except for their car and a rusted pickup truck 3 spaces down. The knocking stopped. Grace held her breath, waiting, but only silence filled the room. The knocking had a deliberate quality to it, like a code or signal, like someone or something was trying to communicate. "Nothing," she said finally. "Go back to sleep." But 20 minutes later, just as she was drifting off again, it returned. "Okay." The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint. Tap, tap. This time, Marcus heard it too. He sat up, instantly alert. Someone's at the door. She looked down at the mattress beneath her, then at Marcus, who had gone pale. They both stared toward the entrance, but the sound wasn't coming from that direction. Tap, tap, tap. Marcus was right behind her, and they both stood pressed against the far wall, staring at the innocent-looking queen bed in horror. The knocking stopped instantly, as if whatever was down there knew it was being watched. What if someone's trapped down there? What if there's a basement or something? The window. Marcus slipped out of bed and padded to the door, peering through the peephole. Nobody there. The knocking continued, steady and patient. Tap, tap, tap. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, looking around the room. Grace sat up in bed, her heart starting to race. Something was very wrong here. Now, tap, 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 as they threw their belongings into the car. Grace could swear she heard the knocking following them, echoing across the parking lot like a desperate plea. "It's coming from ... Grace's voice died in her throat as the horrible realization hit her. The first thing Grace did was search online for information about the Sleepy Inn Motel. The knocking wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from directly underneath them. Tap, tap. During construction, workers had discovered dozens of unmarked graves. But the developer had decided to proceed anyway, moving only the headstones and leaving the bodies undisturbed. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she still heard it, that patient, rhythmic knocking, waiting for someone to answer from the world above. Grace scrambled off the bed so fast she nearly fell. Tap, tap. The sound continued, muffled but unmistakable. Something beneath the bed was knocking on the underside of the box spring, the rhythm never varying, never stopping. "We need to leave," Grace whispered. "Right now." But Marcus was already moving toward the bed, his curiosity overriding his fear. "Marcus, don't." He dropped to his knees beside the bed and lifted the edge of the floral comforter. Grace couldn't see Marcus's face in the darkness, but she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Grace," he said, his voice tight with terror. "There's no floor under here." "What do you mean there's no floor?" "I mean, there's just nothing. It's like the bed is sitting over a hole." The knocking resumed, but now it was different, faster, more urgent. Tapped, 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 tap, 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 dash, tap, tap. Grace grabbed their bag and Marcus's arm. "We're leaving." They fled the room without looking back, not even bothering to return the key. They drove straight through the night, not stopping until they reached the next town. What she found made her blood run cold. The motel had been built in 1987 over the site of an old cemetery. Room 237 sat directly above what had once been the cemetery's oldest section. Grace closed her laptop and never spoke of that night again. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable. From the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.